What's up guys? Welcome to the 2023 Subaru Crosstrek. This is a compact CUV and it's one of the cheaper models you can buy in their current lineup. Now, being a 2023 model year, this is actually not the latest Crosstrek. The 2024 received a facelift, but the reason that the owner Mahesh bought this 2023 premium model is because this is the last year of the Crosstrek that can be purchased with a manual transmission. Of course, it's got standard all-wheel drive, and in premium trim, which is just one trim level above the base model, this car has an MSRP of around $25,000. I think with destination, Mahesh paid around 27 grand. 10-15 years ago, that was not an insignificant amount of money, but nowadays, 27 grand is pretty cheap for a brand new car. So first impressions on the outside, I absolutely love this red color. It stands out without being gaudy. The front end has a very rugged look. It's got plenty of ground clearance. I mean, look at this wheel to fender gap here. Forget about 3-finger gap. This is like 2-hand gap. Now, being a premium trim, this does not have a whole lot of creature comforts and tech. For example, no keyless entry, no power liftgate. You actually have to press a button here, manually open it up, and manually close it. In terms of cargo space, this thing obviously is a pretty compact CUV. Now, thankfully, you can fold the rear seats down, as I'll demonstrate here. And that gives us a reasonable amount of cargo space. With my driving position, I'm 5'7". Sitting in the back seat, I'm actually really quite comfortable. Plenty of leg room. My only potential issue is headroom here. I'm actually okay, but definitely if I was 6 feet tall, this would be a problem. I definitely do feel like I'm sitting higher up than my driving position, which admittedly is as low as it'll go since the front seat is height adjustable. No rear air vents, really not a whole lot of anything back here, just a window switch. We've got the fake carbon fiber look on some of the trim pieces on the doors, as well as the dash. I appreciate the fact that the rear seat has 60-40 split. Very no frills back seat. Now, in the front of the Crosstrek, again, very basic interior. It's not even push to start. You still have to turn the key. In terms of the center console, we have a very tiny color display. Now, I'm told this has wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Unfortunately, I do not have the right cable with me right now for my Pixel 6, so I can't test that out. But either way, it's going to be a little bit painful on this tiny screen. Got pretty old school knobs and dials for the HVAC. We do have 2-stage heated seats for the front seats. Got a few basic buttons on the steering wheel here for your multimedia, your phone, and then your cruise control. Pet peeve of mine, but I understand it in a $25,000 car, is these blank buttons. There are quite a few of them in the Crosstrek, at least in the premium trim. Look at all these. There are 6 buttons here, and only one of them does anything, which is the traction control button. Now, onto the specs of the car. This car weighs a little over 3,100 pounds, so fairly lightweight for a crossover at least. And being a premium trim, this has the base 2-liter naturally aspirated flat-4 engine. It makes just 152 horsepower and 145 pound-feet of torque. I have to say, the engine is definitely the most disappointing part of this car. And let me show you guys why. Let's go for a drive. Now, one of the downsides with getting a manual Crosstrek is that Subaru takes away all of your eyesight driving aids. Lane keep assist and whatnot, all of that's not available with the manual transmission. That is a bummer. Setting away in the 2023 Crosstrek Premium, very easy car to drive. It feels more like a sedan or a hatchback to drive than a CUV or SUV. It feels nimble, it has light controls, everything's fairly direct, steering feels good. And probably my favorite part of the Crosstrek's driving dynamics, other than the simple fact that it has a manual transmission in this day and age, is the ride quality. The suspension compliance in this car is really good. And I mean really good. It is a far better riding vehicle than the 2023 Toyota Sequoia Capstone I recently tested. And I would venture to say it rides potentially even better, slightly, than the Mazda CX-9. It has just such a plush quality to it. You can go over bumps at low speed and high speed and barely feel them. And overall NVH is really low as well. Now this particular car does have a slight issue where the driver's side window won't go all the way up because of this guard here. Hopefully that doesn't affect the audio quality too much. And here's where I have a problem with the Crosstrek. That is foot to the floor, third gear, 4,000 RPM, 4,500, 5,000, and we're just barely catching up to Sunday morning traffic here. This car is excruciatingly slow. I mean, 152 horsepower and 145 pound-feet in a nearly 3,200 pound car, that is not a good power to weight ratio at all. And actually, because of the gearing of this manual transmission, when you shift from first to second gear, you need to rev the engine up to around 3,000 RPM before you do the shift, because the first and second gear are spaced pretty far apart. If you tried to shift at, say, 2,000 RPM, in second gear the RPMs fall so low that the engine actually begins to lug. I experienced that driving this around town yesterday, and it's actually quite frustrating. You have to drive around this engine. It has no low end, it has no top end, it really just is quite anemic. I'm in sixth gear right now, 65 miles an hour, 2,500 RPM, foot to the floor. Look at this. This Prius is absolutely smoking me. So you got a downshifted gear. What's the big deal, you say? Let's try that again. Let's get down to 65 miles an hour. Fifth gear, we're at 2,900 RPM. Foot to the floor. Come on, Subaru. Now here's the thing, you can get this car with a larger 2.5 liter flat 4 engine that makes about 30 more horsepower and 30 more pound-feet of torque. That sounds perfect. That's exactly the amount of power I would want in a cheap, zippy little CUV with a manual transmission. That sounds adequate. Well, too bad. You can't get it with a manual transmission. Only this base 2-liter engine is offered with a 6-speed manual. And that, in my opinion, is a shame. Besides the engine, the rest of this car, in terms of the way it drives, is actually really nice. Again, compliance is so good. I'm really impressed with how this car rides. I can easily see myself doing hundreds, if not thousands of miles at a time in this Crosstrek. Now here are some things I don't like, but are excusable given the budget price point of the car. There's no engine temperature gauge, coolant or oil temp. Also, this center console, lots of piano black plastic, very cheap materials. Pretty much everything is cheap plastic. But given that this vehicle is built in Japan, unlike a lot of other Subarus these days, the build quality, the construction is actually really good. Everything feels like it's screwed together really nicely. No squeaks and rattles, although this car does only have a little over 700 miles. But even then, I'm pretty impressed with the overall construction. I just wish the materials were a little bit better. At least this piano black piece. Look at that, third gear, 1,500 RPM. That is foot to the floor. No passing power in this vehicle. When you drive this car around and you have to maneuver through traffic, you really do have to keep it at least 1 gear lower than you would in most other cars. In terms of fuel economy, with the manual transmission, this is rated for 21 miles per gallon in the city, 29 miles per gallon on the freeway, around 25 mpgs overall. Of course, it takes regular 87 octane. And the nice thing is this has a 16.6 gallon fuel tank, which means on average, you should get roughly 400 miles on a tank. The tach and the speedo, at night, they're very dimly lit and difficult to read. You can adjust the brightness with this. The problem is, in the brightest setting, this screen becomes way too bright for night use. So you have to dial it back one click, and then that makes the gauge cluster very difficult to read. But if you don't care about any of that, you just want a simple, practical daily driver that drives well and is engaging to drive, then outside of the lack of power, this car is great. The manual transmission feels pretty good. It's very notchy feeling. It has relatively long throws, but not overly long, I would say, and feels like pretty much any other manual transmission from a modern Subaru. The clutch pedal, however, is not great. It does have a very springy feel, and it gives me very little feedback of the engagement point. So paired with how quiet this engine is at low RPMs, it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge to drive this smoothly in first and second gear. But you do get used to it, and it's a very minor gripe. One other gripe I have with the engine, by the way, is the rev hang. There is a little bit of rev hang when you clutch in. For example, I'm in fourth gear, 2100 RPM. If you watch the tach, I'm gonna clutch in 3, 2, 1, and it takes just an extra second or so for the revs to start dropping. And that can make for a slightly jerky upshift. You have to be a little bit slower with your inputs. This infotainment system, if you can even call it that, again, is very, very basic. There's really not a whole lot you can do here. Oh look, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Okay, so it does work. It's foot to the floor in fourth gear. From a powertrain standpoint, it feels like I'm driving an economy car from 15 years ago. But from a ride quality standpoint, it feels like I'm driving a much more expensive car. There's that rev hang. Gotta be real slow with your shifts to make it smooth. But once you're just gliding along and not trying to overtake, it's actually a really pleasant car to drive. You just glide through these roads, over the bumps, and it's perfectly comfortable. These seats are okay, but for me, there's a little bit too much lumbar support in the way that it pushes my lower back out. I do think I would get a little bit of lower back fatigue on longer journeys. Sound system in this car is actually a pleasant surprise. It was better than I expected. It's far better than the sound system in my Subaru BRZ. So overall, what do I think of the 2023 Crosstrek? I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's really cool that you can get an affordable $25-ish thousand car with all-wheel drive, plenty of interior space for your passengers and your cargo, excellent ride quality, good overall construction, and this manual transmission. It is a fun little car to zip around in, but man, this engine is just, it's so underwhelming. It's really my only significant gripe with this. If only you could get the 2.5 liter with the manual, I think this might be a really good contender for a fun daily driver for less than $30,000. But all that is kind of a moot point now, because as I mentioned, the 2024 facelifted Crosstrek, you can't even get with a manual. It's CVT only, and that I think is a shame. But that's just a sign of the times. People just aren't buying manuals. Although I did see a recent report saying that there was a slight resurgence in manual purchases in the last couple of years. I think cars like this are really just fun in a quirky kind of way. And we definitely won't be getting them for much longer. Let me know what you guys think of the pre-facelift 2023 Subaru Crosstrek. Are there mods you can do to this 2-liter engine to make it a bit peppier? Not that I would strap a turbo on a Crosstrek, but at least a couple of bolt-ons, maybe a tune, just to give it another, say, 20 horsepower? Is that possible? A big thank you again to the owner Mahesh. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.